Defending Jacob is the new Apple TV Plus crime drama limited series starring Chris Evans, and I'm here with the show's composer, Atli Orvarsson, who scored all 8 episodes. I'm Kevin Jacobsen of Gold Derby, asking you, Atli, first off, what was just the overall feeling that you wanted to evoke with your score on this show?
Well, that's a really good question. I think that there's a few things that stuck out to me when I watched the show for the first time. And you know, first of all, it's a bit of a nightmare scenario for any parent. The second of all, you know, the second sort of point is that, you know, there's the characters become really isolated. And so I wanted to evoke this sort of loneliness, and there's this loss of kind of their normal life, a little bit like the situation in the world right now with the COVID-19 virus. But and then there's you could say there's a loss of innocence, and there's a loss of just kind of, you know, what they knew to be their normal life. So I wanted to you know, provoke feelings of kind of this loss and isolation and loneliness. And, you know, we decided to, even though this is a thriller, to really sort of play more the emotional aspect of it. And I think it musically plays more like a drama.
So how did you actually end up getting involved with the show?
Well, you know, the filmmakers were looking for a composer, and my agent, Andrew Zach, sent out a couple of songs that I've been working on for my upcoming solo album that I'm working on. And that turned out to be the music that sort of caught the attention of Mark Baumbach and Morten Tildum, the producer and the director on the show. And which was really brilliant because, you know, that was music that I simply wrote for music's sake. And to be able to kind of sort of segue from something that just comes naturally and from the heart into using that palette in a way for a show was a really great way to approach scoring the show.
Mm-hmm. And what was just the collaboration process with you and, like you said, the director of the series, Morten Tildum, as far as just locking in the right vibe just to match with the visuals?
Well, I mean, the first thing I did was to write a few themes. And, you know, I was obviously trying to hone in on certain characters and certain emotions, certain, you know, things that would fit certain themes of the show. And, you know, as soon as those became clear and we sort of agreed on them, then, you know, it basically came, you know, we started scoring each episode. And we had a very limited amount of time to do this, basically just over 2 months. Should have been probably 5 or 6. So in a way, there wasn't much time to think. So we had to really just kind of go with our guts and be brave and be bold, I think. And but, you know, I think what's so interesting is when you work with people who you kind of quickly develop a shorthand with, and there's like this understanding, and there's a real collaboration. You know, if you have that kind of a rapport and a trust, and it becomes a proper relationship and a real collaboration, and that's what we were able to build. And I think that's the reason why we're able to do this in such a short amount of time.
And so you've done a lot of work on crime shows. I think it's safe to say things like Law and Order, Chicago PD, all the Chicago shows actually. FBI, and this is also a crime drama, but it's on Apple, which is a different beast, I think, than network TV. So did you find there to be differences just in how you scored the music for this, as far as timing out a scene or making sure you're not repeating a theme too much or anything like that?
Yeah, there were some big differences. Actually, this is more thematic than we typically tend to be on the network shows. And, you know, but I would say that the biggest difference perhaps is the music. I think there's more of a commentary on how, people's inner world, how they're feeling, rather than what's happening on the screen. So I think that's maybe the biggest difference. It's more internal. It's more, as I said, it's like commenting on what people are thinking rather than what they might be doing.
So was there like a discussion about making sure the score was an integral part of the show, but also not too manipulative or obtrusive or anything like that?
Yeah, I think very much so. I think when people see the show, they'll sort of experience a lot of restraint, and I think the filmmaking in general on the show is really restrained. The acting, directing, the writing, lighting, all of it is quite sort of, I wouldn't say holding back, but it's got a very sort of restrained character, and the music certainly needed to fit into that as well. So there are moments when we, not necessarily tell people how or what to feel, but we allow them to feel. And there are moments when the music really is sort of more of a soundscape and more of a kind of just a canvas for your own interpretation of the show. So I think that might be kind of another big difference between this and some of the network shows.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of influences were you inspired by here? Because there's this kind of a dark ambient vibe, but there's also these moments usually with like a piano that are a little more, I guess, hopeful, and I think suggests some sense of hope for this family that has just gone through so much. And it just has like a certain familiarity to me that I can't really put my finger on. But did you take inspirations from other composers at all?
I'm sure I did. That's kind of the nature of the beast, especially because, as I said, it's sort of, the music is a little bit in that it's, sometimes people refer to the style of music as neoclassical or post-classical. And there's a lot of composers in that world who are releasing albums and scoring shows and movies. So I think all of these, I don't know. I mean, I think it's impossible not to be inspired and influenced by the music that you love to listen to, and at the same time, I wanted to try to find this kind of character for this music. And, I think that, Morten is Norwegian, I'm Icelandic. And I think there was kind of like this sort of Scandinavian vibe that I just felt kind of dripped off the screen when I watched it. And I'm pretty sure Morten was intentionally using a bit of sort of Nordic noir kind of vibe, for the filmmaking. And I think that the music absolutely has that vibe as well.
Mm-hmm. It really does kind of have that chilly feeling to it. It takes place in Massachusetts. It was filmed in Massachusetts. So I was actually just curious if you were able to go there to get a vibe for the atmosphere, or any sort of research you did into that area of the country.
Well, I lived in Boston for 3 years while I was going to college. So, I indirectly I did quite a bit of research on living there. And, to be honest, when I was going to school there were days that I really didn't want to go outside because it was so cold and so miserable. And that's saying something for somebody coming from Iceland. So I think that perhaps, between Iceland and having lived in Boston, I was sort of uniquely equipped to score the show.
Mm. Also, I saw in the end credits that the opening theme music was written by Olafur Arnalds. Mm-hmm. Was there any collaboration there of trying to make sure that the music within the show fit with that opening theme?
There was absolutely, a what's the word that I'm looking for? There was a concerted effort to make sure that it all lived in the same space. And I just think that, again, it comes down to aesthetics and perhaps our backgrounds too. Oliver is a friend of mine, and he's also from Iceland, and so I think there is it just to an extent happened naturally, and B, I think absolutely we wanted to make sure that there was kind of this world that was created. But the main title, I would say, only goes so far. It's a beautiful main title. I love that piece of music, and I think it sets the tone perfectly. But there was a lot of other kind of scenes in the film, in the show, that required different things. So, I in a way needed to make a broader, bigger world. But yeah, I think there's definitely a relationship.
So how much did you chart out the arc of the series as far as how the score sounds in the beginning versus the end, without getting into too many spoilers, obviously?
Yeah. Well, that was something I was really conscious of from the beginning, because the 8th episode is quite the finale. So, I wanted to make sure that somehow I laid pipe for where we were going with it. But on the other hand, we were going so fast that there hardly was time to really map it out, and I just had to keep going and get through each episode. But I feel like each episode sort of posed its own question and had each one I had to sort of like solve the puzzle of each episode to get to the end. And so, there are certainly themes and ideas that are repeated, but I feel like they have some distinctive stylistic or differences, perhaps more in feeling than style, but they're each a bit unique. So I think for me, it's if you would watch all 8 episodes in a row, which I'm sure some people will do because it's very hard to stop watching it, in my opinion, then you'll find that it's really, the structure of the storytelling is really like one incredibly long movie, because there's 3 acts and it just has that arc. So I guess it's a long-winded way to say that I was as conscious of it as I could be, but at the same time, I think I sort of had to go, like, sort of follow the path and let the show tell me what it wanted.
Yeah. Was there anything just in the score that you were particularly proud of accomplishing that maybe a casual viewer might not necessarily pick up on right away?
Well, yeah, there's certainly a few moments that I'm sort of more in love with than others. But I think, again, I feel like, I don't know, maybe if there's an accomplishment in it, it's about finding a tone that feels true to the show and is, I think some of the music is emotional and beautiful, but at the same time, there's this dark underbelly. And I think that juxtaposition of darkness and light is perhaps what I'm sort of most happy about in the whole big scheme of things.
And just going back to your wide body of work on TV, you really do kind of specialize in these kinds of crime dramas. And I'm curious to know if there's something about them that you just take to more as a composer, maybe?
I have never thought about it that way, but perhaps. I do a lot of different things. I'm currently scoring a comedy, and I've done stuff across the spectrum. But I will say, actually, comedy is probably the hardest of all. And there's just, if you think about it, when you're dealing with darker themes, if you will, there's just a bit more material to work from. You know, there's like the frequencies get wider and thicker, and there's just, I find more interesting material to work with in the darkness than in the light. But having said that, if you're able to kind of combine the two, make beautiful music that has a sort of this dark, ominous gravitas, that's kind of what appeals to me more than anything.
So I think this is your first interview here at Gold Derby. So can you just tell us a little more just about, you know, how you got into the industry of writing music for film and TV, and just what compels you so much about this craft?
Yeah, you know, I basically had a bit of an epiphany when I was going to college, actually in Boston. I was going to Berklee College of Music, and had been playing in bands, and I grew up playing in orchestras, and so I had a very sort of varied, wide background in music, anything from, you know, playing trumpet in a theater pit orchestra to keyboards in a rock and roll band, etc. And so by the time I got to Berklee, I was really kind of sort of, in hindsight, kind of figuring out a way to reconcile all these parts of myself. And I decided to try a course in film music there. And it was just, yeah, like I said, it was a bit of an epiphany. The first time I tried, you know, what I refer to as the alchemy of music and images together, I knew this is something that I had to do. So, and in that sense, I really feel really lucky that I knew pretty early on what really compels me and what I really enjoy doing. I mean, having said that, as I said, I'm working on a solo album and doing music for music's sake and for myself as well. But there's something about this magic that, you know, when you put music against the images, the sum is greater than, you know, the sum of the parts, hopefully. And, you know, that is just has an infinite appeal to me.
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Atli. We really appreciate it. For those of you watching, please hit like and subscribe for more Emmy season interviews, and head to goldderby.com to make your predictions.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.